I'm 32 now, a licensed electrician with a solar and electrical contracting company that grew from a folding ladder and a Craigslist ad into a real outfit. We wire tenant build-outs for clinics, at EV chargers where the parking lot smells like hot asphalt and new plans, and design small solar arrays so the pizza place on Main doesn't blink when the grid hiccups. I sign paychecks on Fridays. My van doesn't rattle anymore. I own a calibrated torque wrench just because it feels good to tighten things to spec. I get complimented on neat conduit runs. My guys text me memes about wire nuts. Customers call me sir and mean it. And yet, every time I open my company checkbook, I feel a ghost hand patting down my pockets for a debt I didn't make. I learned about debts in a kitchen where the linoleum curled at the edges and the fridge hummed like an anxious animal. After my parents split when I was 11, I moved in with my mother in our mill town, the kind where the river looks like it's always thinking about leaving. She remarried a man who wore his baseball cap like a crown and his resentment like cologne. He had opinions about everything and expertise in nothing. He had a phrase he liked almost as much as the sound of his own voice. "Remember," he'd say, tapping the fridge with a sharp as if it were a gavel. "You're accruing debt every day under this roof." He said it when I asked to go on a school trip, when I poured a second glass of milk, when I took a shower after soccer practice. The fridge was his stage. He tapped the metal and smirked, like the appliance, and I shared a joke at my expense. They called it the ledger. Sometimes it was a bit, a way to make me feel complicit. "Let's add the bus ticket, the lunch, the teacher's emotional labor," he said when I wanted to go to the science museum. He drew invisible numbers in the air, pen squeaking without ink. Other times, it was real. A dry erase board appeared on the fridge, then columns, groceries, electric phone, misc. Next to each they wrote amounts with righteous loops. I ate dinner while doing math in my head. If I didn't ask for seconds, would groceries shrink? If I turned off the light before he walked past the hallway, would electric forgive me? The whiteboard marker squeaked like a tiny scream. The first time I reached for ketchup without asking, my stepfather pointed at the list and said, "Condiments aren't free, champ." I learned to like bland. I became hypervigilant in small, silly ways that didn't feel silly then. I stacked my fork and knife at perfect angles so I wouldn't be accused of leaving a mess that cost time. I timed showers to the second, watching steam run down tile like money down a drain. I memorized which light switches buzzed and which didn't, so I could flip them off before he showed up with a lecture about kilowatt hours and who pays for this. Shame became wallpaper. I could smell it when I opened the fridge, sour milk, pickle brine, the metallic sting of the icebox. My heartbeat learned to sync to the garage door motor. When I was 14 and got a weekend job bagging groceries, my mother hugged me for 3 seconds, warm, vanilla perfume, and then stepped back with her palm out. "Hand over your paycheck for the groceries you ate," she said, tone neutral like a cashier calling next in line. The bills went from warm to cold as I folded them into her fingers. I wanted to argue that I ate the cheap cereal, that I skipped breakfast most days, that I bought ramen with my tips. But the ledger had gravity. I stopped wanting and learned to trade money for silence, chores for reprieve, good grades for fewer comments. I hoarded coins in the toe of a soccer cleat I'd outgrown because the ledger didn't check there. I stopped asking to go to friends' houses because visits were luxuries, and gas isn't free. I kept a secret map in my head of how to leave, which streets had sidewalks without frost heaves, which bus routes ran late, which back doors on which buildings didn't lock properly. I didn't know electricity would become my language. I only knew darkness was free and light cost. The performances made it worse. The ledger was a prop, and I was the straight man. If I asked for a school hoodie because I was cold waiting for practice, my stepfather would uncap the marker like a magician warming up. "Sweatshirt, $30. Laundry, what, too?" He'd draw an interest doodle because banks charge interest, so do we. He would glance at my mother to see if she was laughing. She laughed like a cough. Their love felt like a tab that could be called at any second. I thought about running away the way other kids thought about college, in hazy, wistful detail that only got crisp in the dark. My mother's favorite line was one I still hear sometimes when I'm cutting EMT. "We do this because we love you. Family helps family." But family also pays family back. When I brought home a B+ on a math test, she stuck it on the fridge next to the costs. The magnet pinched the paper right over a $sign. It felt like a translation. You earned something, now return it. If you're reading this thinking, that's insane, I agree. But kids survive by adapting to the rules they're given. Mine were simple: don't cost too much, don't ask twice, and remember the ledger watches. I kept a tiny budget notebook where other kids kept doodles and secret crush codes. Mine said things like, if I skip school lunch for 2 weeks, that's $15 saved. And, mow Mr. K's lawn twice equals bus fare. I didn't know the phrase. Coercive control. I knew the way my stomach clenched when the garage door opened. I knew the weight of nickels. I knew I wanted a future where the fridge had magnets from places, not lists of debts. Older me writes bids now: labor, materials, permit fees, overhead, profit. It's clean math. You tell a client what something costs, you do the work, you get paid. Nobody dangles dinner in the middle of the conversation. But every time I price a conduit sweep or a main panel upgrade, I feel 11 again, watching a marker squeak on white enamel. That's the story I'm here to tell: how I paid the ledger back, exactly once, and how paying it was the cheapest thing I ever did. One winter, the ledger expanded to include my phone. I was 15, and the town only had 2 things that made you feel connected: the mill whistle and a flip phone with 9 lives. My stepfather slapped a bill on the table like evidence. Minutes don't grow on trees, he said. You want to text your little friends? That's debt. I offered to mow extra lawns to cover it. He smiled like a landlord. Good boy. When soccer season started, I needed new cleats. He twirled the marker. Tell coach to loan you his. The joke landed heavy. I waited until no one was looking and taped the toe of my old pair. It held for 2 games. After that, I learned to run on the outside of my feet so the holes wouldn't show. And I started counting bites at dinner, because fullness was expensive. The worst fights were quiet. The loud ones burned fast: door slams, the scrape of a chair, a rant about respect. The quiet ones seeped into your bones and made you cold for days. There was a night when I was 16 and asked about the senior trip. It wasn't fancy, just a bus to the state capitol, a tour of the museum, and a baseball game if the weather held. I had saved tip money in a cereal box and counted it twice. I practiced the ask in the mirror, smoothing my face into something that wouldn't offend. At dinner, I waited for the right lull and said, I've got most of it covered. I can make up the rest with an extra shift. My stepfather flipped through a magazine, not reading. He didn't look up. Remember, he said, tapping the refrigerator door with his knuckle as if calling a courtroom to order, you're accruing debt every day under this roof. He let the sentence hang like a spider thread. My mother's eyes flicked from the fridge to my face. Maybe next year, she said, even though there was no next year for seniors. I nodded like I had learned, an apology without words. In my room I recounted the money and put it back. The cereal box felt like a savings account with a broken lock. I started to measure myself by cost. Socks with holes I could darn, cheap. A split lip from a stray elbow in soccer, cheap. Needing a ride, expensive. I learned the choreography of kitchens: enter, retrieve, retreat. The fridge door had a particular squeak at midpoint. I learned to stop short, so I wasn't accused of standing there letting all the cold out like we're heating the neighborhood. I'd crack eggs in pairs to avoid the conversation about protein per dollar. I memorized recipes that stretched pasta with just enough sauce. A full plate felt like a moral failure. When I brought home my first tax form from the grocery store, the W-2 printed on paper thin enough to feel like a trick, my mother scared at the withholding. Government takes their cut, she said, eyes on the numbers. We're not the government. I tried. She didn't look up. Hand over your paycheck for the groceries you ate. I handed it over. She peeled 20s like stickers. She left me $5 and a lecture about gratitude. The house had a way of turning my needs into their generosity. If I needed shoes for gym, my stepfather would make a show of circling prices in a flyer. See how much that is? You know what else is that much? Part of the electric this month. He loved math when it was a weapon. He loved phrases that sounded like justice. Fair is fair, he'd say, putting a check mark next to an item on the whiteboard. But the board only ever listed what flowed toward them. At 17, I got my first real taste of the big ledger. My stepfather wanted a truck, the kind with a chrome grin and a payment plan. His credit was shot from a trail of installment plans he'd abandoned like broken toys. He waited until my mother was stirring pasta, let the steam fog his glasses to look gentler, then said, "Family helps family. You're 18 in a few months. You can co-sign. We'll build your credit. It's a win-win." The words stuck to the ceiling like spaghetti. I stared at the paper he slid across the table. The interest rate looked like a dare. "I don't think I can," I said, my voice small and stubborn. He smiled without his eyes. "It's not a question." He leaned back, chair creaking. "You live here for free. You eat our food. You sleep under my roof. You're accruing debt every day. You want to pay some back? Sign." I'd read enough internet on the library computers to know what a cosigner does. You carry the risk without the keys. "I really can't." I tried again, and this time he didn't smile. He stood, slow, like a bear remembering it's a bear. "If you don't want to help this family, you don't have to be family." My mother stirred the pot harder. "Don't be dramatic," she said to him, to me, to the air. He put a hand on the back of my chair and squeezed hard enough that the wood spoke. "You have a week to think about it," he said. "Or you can pack." I didn't eat much that week. Hunger was cheaper than fear. I hid my tip money in stranger places, inside a flashlight with dead batteries, taped under the bottom drawer where socks go to retire. I kept hearing his voice shaping the house into a contract. Every bite felt like proof for the prosecution. I started counting the clicks of the thermostat at night, trying to guess what number it was set to, wondering how many cents the clicks cost. The night before the week was up, I printed a page from a government website at the library about co-signing. It had bullet points. It had words like liable and default and collections. I underlined items with one of those little golf pencils and took the paper home folded into a square. I waited until he was in a good mood, post-TV, post-beer, pre-rant. I slid the paper to him and said, "This says if you miss a payment, they come after me. I can't do that." He didn't read it. He glanced at the header like I'd handed him a napkin. "You think you're smarter than me because you can Google?" he said. "You like the library so much, you can sleep there." He walked out. My mother didn't follow. When I went to my room, there was a trash bag on my bed. The implication kept me up all night packing and unpacking the same 2 shirts in my head. He didn't kick me out that week. I suspect the dealership turned him down anyway. But the ground tilted. The ledger changed shape from a whiteboard to a leash. I felt it any time I asked for anything: a ride to school early for a makeup test, a reminder for picture day, a copy of a permission slip for a shop class. "You're lucky to have a roof," he'd say, because roofs were his favorite metaphor. "You know what roofs cost." My escape plan started to sprout legs. I picked up a pre-dawn shift unloading trucks at the discount store on the edge of town for a.m. call time, heavy boxes that smelled like rubber and dust. I liked the way work made simple sense: lift, carry, stack, repeat, backache that came honest. I would ride the early bus with the night nurses and the one guy who always wore a suit and slept sitting up. My fingers cracked in winter and healed by June. When I got off school, I mowed lawns. On Sundays, I snuck into the vocational building where the auto kids left manuals out, and I read torque specs like scripture. I sharpened a little part of myself no one in the house could dull. I started to believe that if I could wire a 3-way correctly in the lab, I could wire a life where the only ledger in the kitchen was a goofy magnet with a shopping list. So when the guidance counselor handed me a pamphlet for a community college 2 hours away, their electrical program circled and highlighted like a beacon, I didn't ask permission. I filled out the application on a library computer, lungs trembling. I put my social down carefully, printing each number like a prayer. Under emergency contact, I wrote my mother's name and then erased it. I left it blank. It felt like a sin and a cure. The ledger kept running that summer, but something in me stopped taking dictation. I washed dishes at the restaurant downtown until midnight and stocked shelves before dawn. I kept tip money in a sock in the sock drawer because sometimes the simplest hiding places are the bravest. I ate staff meal like it was ritual. I said yes to every extra shift until yes felt like a bridge. I wasn't free yet, but the door had hinges and I was learning which way they swung. I left 2 weeks after graduation with a backpack, a duffel, and a used bus pass that still had someone else's teeth marks on the edge. Community college was 2 hours away, which felt like the distance between one version of me and another. I found a room in a house that used to be a barber shop. You could still see the faint stripes of the pole under layers of white paint. The rent was $350 if I paid cash and promised not to complain about the radiator's opinions. I said yes before the landlord finished the sentence. There was a dead outlet in the hallway. I fixed it and took $10 off my rent with his blessing. The ledger didn't live here. My schedule made me into a ghost with steel-toed boots. Pre-dawn, I unloaded trucks at a big box store. The cardboard sliced my hands until they got their calluses back. I learned the smell of pallets and the sound of a pallet jack whining when it needed grease. After a shower in the locker room and a coffee that tasted like the color brown, I took the bus across town to campus. The NEC codebook became my second Bible. Article 110 tattooed itself into my brain, then 210, then 250. I made flashcards and taped them to the wall above my mattress. I highlighted until the book looked like a traffic light. Evening lab was the only thing that felt like oxygen. We wired 3 ways until our fingers remembered without us, argued about conduit fill and derating like we were debating politics, and practiced bending EMT until the sweeps looked like art. The instructor was a retired inspector who swore like a sailor and had a soft spot for neatness. "Make it pretty so it stays safe," he'd say, rapping a knuckle against a crooked run and making us redo it. I liked that you could see the work get better in real time, not just on a report card. On the bus rides, I wrote notes that weren't in the book. "If you don't know, stop. Dead men can't finish jobs. Ask the old guy questions, he wants to talk. Keep a pencil behind your ear, people trust pencils." I went home to the ex-barber shop and studied until the radiator hissed me to sleep. When I woke up, I did it again. The ledger still whispered at the edges, but now it sounded like a heckler from the cheap seats. I was too far from the kitchen to hear the squeak of their marker anymore. The Union Hall opened its doors like a church with steel rafters. A second-year student told me to go down on a Wednesday with my resume and clean boots because that's when contractors came sniffing. I wore my only decent jeans and the shirt without a logo and waited on a plastic chair under a bulletin board of safety posters. A foreman from a company that did hospital work called my name, looked me up and down, and said, "You show up early, you stay late, you learn. Deal?" I said, "Deal," before my brain could invent a reason to apologize. Apprenticeship hours are a different kind of math. You count to 8, then 10, then 12, and your back learns a new language. I learned to pull THN through a crowded pull box without skinning it. I learned to crimp lugs until my forearm throbbed. I learned that hospitals have smells that stick to you, bleach and fear and coffee. The first time I shut off a breaker that fed a wing, my hands shook and I triple-checked the tags and locks. The first time a doctor thanked me for getting the generator to behave, I felt taller than any title. I passed my journeyman exam on a Tuesday that smelled like rain. I still have the scratch paper with the doodle of a panel schedule in the margin and the words, "Don't second-guess 304," underlined twice. I went out for a burger and ate the entire thing without counting bites. I sent a photo of the little card to my mother. She texted back, "So proud. By the way, our electric bill is up this month." I didn't reply. I turned the phone face down and stared at the ceiling fan until the room stopped spinning. Journeyman status didn't make me rich, it made me brave. I started saying yes when neighbors in my crummy block asked if I could look at a thing. I replaced 2 prong outlets in a grandma apartment, and put a GFCI by a sink, and the tenant cried because no one had ever done something safe for her on purpose. I fixed a breaker that tripped whenever someone used the microwave and the toaster at the same time, and a guy paid me in cash and old tools from his garage. That's how I got my first torque wrench, scarred handle, perfect click. I saved for a van the way you save for a winter you know is coming. I kept a spreadsheet with a column called "Don't Touch," and another called Gas plus ramen. On Sundays I changed my own oil in the alley with a pan that had a dent from someone else's life. The van I could afford was white and tired and had a door that stuck, but it started every morning like it wanted to be good. I bought magnetic signs with my last $120 and stuck them on crooked because my hands were shaking. I laughed alone in the alley and straightened them. It felt like a costume and a crown. The LLC paperwork felt like a magic trick that made me visible to the world. I sat at the library computer clicking through forms, the cursor blinking like it was daring me. When the email came through with the stamped articles, I printed them twice. I invented a logo, a tidy house with a sun peeking over the roof and a lightning bolt that looked like it paid rent on time. I made a one-page website that said what I did and what I didn't do. I didn't do. Expose live parts. I wrote, because you have to joke with yourself when you're scared. I opened a business checking account and put $500 in it, and didn't cry in the bank because the pen was on a chain and I didn't want to tug it. I took the master electrician exam because the idea of not taking it felt like standing in a doorway and refusing to step through. I studied the code like it owed me money, built a binder with tabs like a jealous spouse, and took practice tests until my pencil eraser was a nub. The morning of the test, I ate a banana I couldn't taste and drank water like it was holy. I walked out with a headache and an answer sheet that felt like it would catch fire in the sun. When the letter came that said passed, I sat on the stairs and let my forehead rest against the railing and laughed until my chest hurt. Somewhere in there, I turned 32. The van got replaced with a used box truck that didn't stall at lights. We got a contract to add solar to the roof of a small clinic, 12 kW of panels that would famously keep the vaccines cold during a storm the following spring. A property manager sent me Christmas cookies and an email about the next quarter's projects. The checking account didn't bounce when I bought wire by the pallet. My forearm muscles separated in that way electricians get, a little rope under the skin that says, I carry things and they obey me. And still, at the edge of all that, a voice. Not even words anymore, just the shape of a finger tapping a fridge. The ledger hadn't been on my refrigerator in years, but I carried it like a scar on my habits. I never took the last donut. I stood up too fast when someone walked into a room. I apologized before I answered the phone. I thought success would be loud, trumpets and fireworks. It turned out to be quiet, and the quiet made it easier to hear who I used to be. That's when the idea of paying back the ledger found me and sat down like it owned a chair. I don't mean paying back like the way they wanted, forever, with interest, with the debt growing like mold. I mean paying back the exact amount of the love they itemized. To the penny. Not out of spite, but as a boundary I could put on paper. I wanted to settle the account they worshipped and then build a new religion entirely. The more bids I wrote, the more I knew I could do it. The more invoices I issued, the more the math felt like a lever. I could put the weight of the past on one end and lift it away with the present. The plan started like most of my jobs start, with a scope, a parts list, and a promise not to cut corners. I didn't want a roast or a dramatic confrontation. I wanted math. I wanted something I could hand to the part of my brain that still flinched at the sound of a fridge door and say, Look! We measured. So I opened a blank spreadsheet on a Sunday morning when the shop was quiet, the smell of PVC cement still hanging in the air from Friday's work, and I named the file. Ledger_settlement. XLSX. The name made my palms sweat. I poured coffee and started building columns. Column A, item. Column B, date range. Column C, source evidence, text email, photo, bank statement. Column D, method, actual/estimated. Column E, cost then. Column F, adjustment to present dollars. Column G, notes. Column H, total. I color-coded by category, blue for groceries, yellow for utilities, green for transportation, gray for school-related fees, red for the phone. I made a tab called Assumptions, because any honest estimate needs to come with its own receipts. Evidence first. I dug through the little digital attic no one else sees, old texts from a pre-smartphone era that carried over when I switched carriers, carefully backed up emails, the few screenshots I'd taken as a kid because somewhere deep down I knew one day I'd need truth that didn't wobble. I found a text from my mother dated March 18th of my junior year. Gas was $40 extra this month taking you to practice. You can give me $20. I found an email from her with the subject, phone bill, with a number circled in the body and the line, we'll cover this for now, but it goes on your ledger. The word ledger. Seeing it typed made something inside me unclench and clench at the same time. And then the photo I didn't remember I'd taken until it popped up in an old cloud album, the whiteboard on the fridge. Groceries 260, electric 120, water 45, phone 65, miss 30. A week in late November. My stepfather's handwriting was unmistakable, numbers done in those big theatrical loops like he was playing house manager. In the corner, a doodle that said, interest, smiley face, with a smiley face that looked like a bruise. I dragged the photo into the folder, renamed it with the date I could triangulate from a calendar on the wall behind it, and placed it in the utilities, evidence stack like a fossil on felt. For gaps I couldn't fill with direct evidence, I did what I do when a customer says, ballpark it, and I refused to ballpark without a building code. I used public data. I went to the government sites that have boring names and beautiful tables and pulled the average monthly cost of residential electricity for our region for the years I lived there. I looked up water and sewer bills from our town council minutes. Bless the clerk who scanned everything into PDFs that looked like they were folded in half for years. I used the USDA's Moderate Cost Food Plan for a teenage male and marked the line where I turned 15, 16, 17. I pulled average cell plan costs from archived reports. I looked up the school's listed fees for soccer, lab goggles, the senior trip that I didn't go on. I adjusted for inflation using the CPI index like I was wiring a subpanel and needed my ampacity right. Every assumption got a footnote. Every footnote got a link. If I couldn't find a number, I put $0 or left a blank. I wasn't interested in punishing them. I was interested in not lying to myself. Then I subtracted. I pulled my own bank statements from those years, the ones where deposits show up in weird amounts because they were tips and pizza shift cash turned into cashier's checks. I highlighted transfers to my mother, $120 on a Tuesday with the memo, groceries, $50 on a Thursday with phone, $200 on a Saturday with rent, even though I slept in a room with a door that didn't latch. I added in gift cards I'd been forced to hand over. There was a Best Buy card from an aunt that disappeared into household costs. I tallied what I paid for the shoes I bought myself, the bus passes, the cleats I found at the consignment store, and then duct taped. I gave myself credit for utilities in the months when they demanded money on the 15th, and then again on the 28th. I refused to assign dollars to chores because I didn't want to argue with ghosts about the hourly rate of taking out trash under a threat. But I did put a line on the assumptions tab that said, no labor offsets counted, not because they had no value, but because I refused to itemize being a child. I looked at the whiteboard photo and remembered the marker squeak. I scrolled to a text where my stepfather had written, hand me $40 for electric by Friday or there's no game for you. Like the power company took payment in teenage humiliation. I added each documented demand to the spreadsheet. For recurring categories like groceries, I made monthly lines from August 2004, age 11, to June 2011, the month I left, using the USDA numbers, and then I subtracted the number of months where I could prove I paid something. For the phone, I assumed one line on a family plan, their words, and used the average monthly cost for those years. I did not add interest, because I will not honor a smiley face. On the utilities, I took the town averages and divided by 3, because there were 3 of us. Then I reduced my share in months when the statements from my bank showed me paying a whole for something. I triple-checked the dates so I wasn't double-billing myself out of some twisted martyrdom. I made notes like, January 2009, paid $100 on January 15th, reduced grocery line by equivalent adjusted share. I wrote, February 2010, charged for gas to practice $20 via text. Data shows they also took $40 for phone, include both. It felt both insane and sane, like taking a caliper to something that lives in the throat. What about child support? I didn't include it. I don't know what was paid or not paid between adults who acted like I was a ledger entry. I only counted the things they put on my tab and the things I paid. If they got money elsewhere, that was their business. If they didn't, that was also their business. Mine was to answer their theology in their language, line items. By the time the sheet had 200 rows, I could feel my shoulders dropping. The noise in my head got quieter because the cells were louder. On one line I wrote, "Soccer cleats, actual," and next to it, $48. 17. Because I found the receipt in an old shoebox tucked under a bath towel in my memory like a small brave thing. On another I wrote, "Senior trip, charged emotionally, not monetarily," and put $000. Because you don't repay what you were never allowed to have. When I was done, I pivoted the table by category and looked at the totals. I added one more tab called Narrative, where I explained each section like I was writing an estimate for a client who wanted transparency. Groceries, documented and estimated with USDA table, utilities, divided by occupants, adjusted, phone, average cost, adjusted, transportation, per text demands, plus a fair share of rides to mandatory school events, school-related fees, per flyers, emails, receipts. Miscellaneous, per the whiteboard's misc line when dates aligned. At the bottom I wrote, "No interest. Inflation only." And then, "Less payments remitted, see evidence." I hit AutoSum and the number landed. It wasn't huge. It wasn't small. It was exactly the size of 7 years of being made to feel like a payroll mistake instead of a child. I stared at it until the decimal points blurred. Then I rounded nothing. I kept every cent. They taught me that cents matter. That night I printed the narrative and the assumptions and stapled them together with a clean staple that didn't bite. I saved the sheet to 3 places. I backed it up to a USB drive and taped it inside the back cover of my code book because I am who I am. I slept well for the first time in a long time. And because spite is a poor carpenter but precision is a good one, I checked the number again in the morning. I'd missed 2 months of USDA data because the report changed, so I interpolated using the surrounding months and documented that I had. I polished the memo I would send in the bank transfer. 2 words. No flourish, no psalm. Just a phrase they loved, inverted. Debt repaid. I copied it into a sticky note on my laptop and into the Notes app on my phone as if memory might smudge. I told no one. Not my crew lead, not the friend who knows everything about me, not the guy at the supply house who can read my face like a panel schedule. Revenge, if that's what you even call it when all you're doing is meeting an invoice, is loud in stories and quiet in life. I wanted quiet. I wanted a Tuesday morning where the only sound was my keyboard and the bank server humming and, somewhere far away, the faintest squeak of a marker finally running out of ink. It happened on a weekday so ordinary the sky felt like it had punched a time clock. I woke up to the cat walking across my ribs like I was scaffolding, made coffee, and checked my job board. 2 service calls and a walkthrough for a small solar retrofit at a daycare where the walls were painted the shade of hope they sell by the gallon at the hardware store. Before any of that, I sat at my kitchen table, sturdy pine, no whiteboard in sight, and opened my business banking app. The number on the screen looked like proof of how many Saturdays I had said no to sleeping in. I took a breath, long and slow, until I could feel my ribs give me permission. Transfers. External. New recipient. I typed their names in the order they always insisted on. The field for the memo blinked at me, a small dare. I pasted. Debt repaid. The cursor sat at the end like a period was a finish line. I copied the account number from the photocopy of a voided check my stepfather had texted me years ago when he insisted I do it electronically like a grown-up. For one of those electric by Friday demands. I'd kept the image because he taught me to keep everything. I checked the routing number against the one listed on a new payment he'd sent me 2 years ago, an attempt to angle me into co-signing something else, dressed up as, "Let me send you gas money to come talk." The numbers matched. Of course they did. The man bragged about not changing banks because loyalty matters. Amount. I entered it exactly as the spreadsheet said. Every digit a pulse. I did not round to the nearest dollar where the petty lives. I included the 37 cents from an ancient grocery charge texted at midnight. I included the single dollar my mother once asked for. Because you ate an extra yogurt. I did not include anything that wasn't on their ledger or in their mouths. They would get exactly what they had itemized love to be worth. My hands shook the way they do when I'm about to energize a panel after a long shutdown, 90% calm, 10% of that animal that understands voltage. I reread the account details. I checked the amount again with my finger. I looked away and looked back because sometimes your eyes trick you when your heart is too loud. Confirm. The button went gray for a breath, then blue, then a spinner ran a lap around my gut. The app thought about it. Somewhere servers blinked. The cat sneezed. The transfer confirmation populated with a reference number like a VIN for a decision. Scheduled immediate. The memo field displayed back to me, debt repaid. The past tense of a cent marched through the tunnel and onto the other side. I clicked, download receipt, and saved it into a new folder called Sent. I printed one copy and slid it under the magnet on my own fridge, one that says, "You are here," with a star on our town. I stood there longer than a grown man should stand in front of an appliance, hands on the cool door, forehead finding the right spot to rest. I expected fireworks behind my eyes. What I felt was the quietest snap, like a zip tie cut clean. Before the impulse to announce could wake up, I did the second half of the plan. Block. I opened my contacts and scrolled to my mother's number, the one that had been Mom, and then Mother, and then I hit block this caller. The system asked if I was sure, like it was guarding a bridge. I was. The phone made that little thud it makes when a door closes. I did the same with my stepfather's cell and the landline to the old house that probably still had a voicemail greeting he recorded like a sheriff. Email next. Gmail has a filter that lets you forward to the void. I built it and added their addresses and every spelling I could think of, including the one with a dot in the middle and the one he used to sign up for fantasy football. I blocked their Facebooks, their new Instagrams, his novelty business profile he made for a handyman hustle that never really hustled. I added a note in my CRM so if either of their names popped up as a lead, it would auto-archive. I sent myself a copy of the receipt with no subject line and then archived that too. I didn't send an explanatory letter. I didn't write a caption. I didn't include the spreadsheet in a pretty folder like a student turning in a project. There was no courtroom to win and no jury to sway. The people who needed to be convinced lived under my sternum, and they'd seen the math. I left for my first service call 20 minutes later, the sun caught in the lip of the box truck windshield like a coin. The address was a bakery with a panel that kept tripping in the middle of icing rushes. The owner met me at the door, wired on frosting and gratitude. "It happens when the second mixer is on and someone opens the giant fridge," she said, air knifing with a spatula as if conducting. I laughed out loud at the word. "I know about fridges," I said, too soft for her to clock. I traced the circuits and found the culprit, a chewed-up run that looked like a cat had played string games with Romex. I replaced it with EMT because kitchens deserve pretty protection, brought the second mixer onto a dedicated breaker, and labeled the panel with my tidy block letters. When I closed the cover, the owner clapped like the end of a magic show. She reached for the tip jar and I waved her off. "Pay the invoice like normal," I said, the words tasting clean. On the way out, I bought a cinnamon roll for my crew because sweetness shared is cheaper than sugar hoarded. At lunch, I checked my phone out of old habit and found a notification from the bank. "Transfer complete." I stared at those two words until they stopped being symbols and started being real. In my head, my stepfather's voice tried to say something, maybe, "This doesn't change the past," or, "Don't think this makes you better." And for the first time, the peanut gallery voice sounded far away, like a TV in the apartment next door playing a rerun nobody's watching. On my way to the daycare walk-through, I drove past the Milltown exit without taking it, even though it would have been 10 minutes out of the way. I looked at the sign like you look at a house you once lived in. There was a moment when I imagined the old fridge, its white enamel tired but stubborn, a new list on it that read, "Money in," and the marker paused in midair because there was nothing left to write. That night, for the first time, I left my phone in another room and slept straight through until the alarm. No dreams, no ledger, no imaginary court date. Just the kind of sleep you get when the breaker's sized right and the load finally makes sense. The next morning I expected a storm, block number voicemails, emails with subject lines like, "How dare you?" The rattling of doors in my head that had long since been locked. What I got was the sound of a Thursday. Trucks backing up, the beep 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 like a metronome for people who work with their hands. My lead texted a photo of a perfectly plumb run with, "We making art today, boss?" and a flexing arm emoji. I sent back a heart and, "Strap every 10 feet, every 3 feet of box." Because love in my language has anchors and spacing. Around 10, an unknown local number called. I let it go to voicemail. The transcript was blank, nothing recorded, the silence of someone daring me to call back. A Gmail filter caught 3 messages and placed them in a folder called Trash Family. A name I wrote without thinking that made me wince and then nod. One subject line slipped through long enough for me to see it before the filter ate it. "What is this?" I pictured my mother at the kitchen table with the laptop open, her mouth in that tiny O she makes when surprised and offended at once, my stepfather pacing because pacing made him taller. At lunch we were on a roof, the kind of mild afternoon that makes you forget August can be mean. We were setting microinverters in a neat row that looked like a parade of beetles. The array would give the daycare a little independence, and a lot of bragging rights. My apprentice, Kay, asked why I was quiet. I said, "Just paid off an old bill." And she nodded like that was a normal sentence. "Feels good when you zero out," she said, and only we knew how many layers a phrase like that could have. The only response that landed in my real inbox came 2 days later through the company website's general contact form, the one my office admin reads first thing on Mondays. She forwarded it with a question mark. It was from my stepfather, and it was short in a way that made my stomach remember old tricks. "We saw the money. If you're trying to buy forgiveness, it doesn't work like that. Call your mother." I stared at the sentence until it fell apart. The premise was wrong. I wasn't buying anything. I was settling an invoice they imagined into being. I wrote one line back and then deleted it, because the plan had no postscript. The block wasn't punishment, it was PPE. The same week, a physical letter arrived at the shop addressed in my mother's handwriting, forwarded by the post office because I haven't lived at the barber shop in years. My shop guy texted, "Looks personal. Want me to shred?" I said yes and surprised myself. The old me would have needed to read, to defend, to counter. The current me knows that sometimes the most radical thing is to let a story die in a bin. The absence of noise made room for noticing. I noticed I wasn't rationing joy. I noticed I didn't count bites anymore unless the food was good and I wanted to remember. I noticed I could open my own fridge at midnight, with the lights spilling out onto the floor like it had something to brag about, and take a slice of leftover pizza without hearing a calculator in the walls. I noticed work got easier in a way that felt like removing a resistor from a circuit that didn't need one. The crew laughed more because I laughed more. I said yes to a Saturday hike because I didn't have to save my energy for imaginary conversations. There were flare-ups of muscle memory. A supplier offered me net 30 terms on a new line of EV chargers and my first instinct was to decline because debt. Then I remembered that credit is a tool like a ladder, dangerous when misused, indispensable when respected. I took the terms, paid on day 15 because it made me feel like I was getting away with something good, and watched the discount hit my account like an adult treat. I bought my crew lunch on a Friday without measuring generosity in ounces. A week later I ran into a guy from my old town at the supply house. He clocked the logo on my shirt and did that surprise frown. "Heard you're doing good," he said. "Your folks must be proud." The word felt like a loose floorboard. I said, "People can be however they are." He waited for gossip and I gave him none. The ledger had taught me every conversation was a transaction. I was unlearning that, one silence at a time. On a Sunday, I took out the USB drive from the back of the code book and plugged it in. I opened the spreadsheet and looked at the tabs like they were old friends you only see at reunions. I checked the assumptions again and a weird thing happened. I didn't need to anymore. The point had never been the perfection of the number. The point had been aligning my life with my own rules. If you itemize care, you will be paid back for care, exactly once, and then you will lose access to me as your vendor. That made me laugh. Love doesn't run on QuickBooks. If you turn it into an invoice, don't be surprised when someone pays it and closes your account. Work gave me tangible closure too. The daycare opened their little app and showed me the panels humming, the line graph bouncing like a happy heartbeat. "We're making our own power," the director said, smiling like a first grader. I looked at the screen and thought, yes. That's the feeling. Not owed, not borrowed, not threatened into being. Made. Generated on purpose. Stored even for later. The one thing I did send, and only once, was a copy of the receipt through the bank's request confirmation feature. The wording is robotic. The bank wants you to feel like the machine did the work. It said, "Recipient has received funds." I sent it only to my mother's email, not as proof, but in case she ever wanted to tell herself a different story, that her son keeps his promises even when the promises were never his to keep. It bounced back. The address had changed or the box was full. I took that as a sign that some containers, when full, are supposed to be set down. I thought the urge to gloat would visit. It didn't. There's nobody to perform for when the audience you grew up with only loves applause that sounds like coins. Instead, the quiet had presence. It had weight and kindness. It felt like a room I'd built, square and level, where the outlets are where you expect and the lights don't flicker when it rains. If you've made it this far, thank you for reading a stranger's wiring diagram. Reddit is where I learned words like coercive control and financial abuse, back when I still called things by their family nicknames. It feels right to end where I would have started if I had known how, with what I kept and what I left. I kept my trade. Electricity is honest. It doesn't care how you feel about it. It cares if you respect it. That's how I try to love people now. Not like a ledger, not like a performance, but like a system you designed to be safe even when someone makes a mistake. My crew jokes that I label like a librarian. They're right. The panels we leave behind could be read by anyone who comes after us, and they'd understand where the power flows. That's love, in my book, clarity for whoever inherits your work. I left the ledger. Not the spreadsheet. I'll always be the guy who checks his math, but the theology that says presence has a price and belonging accrues interest. I don't count bytes. I don't apologize for opening the fridge. I buy groceries for the shop and write it off as a business expense because generosity is the only expense that pays you twice. When my apprentice forgets her lunch, I give her mine and say, "No payback needed." When she still insists, I say, "Okay, you can carry the ladder next time." And we both laugh because a joke is what happens when you take the fear out of a rule. Every so often I think about the boy counting quarters in a cleat. I wish I could go back and tell him a few things. That he wasn't expensive, he was 11. That family helps family is a beautiful sentence until someone says it with a hand out and a boot poised. That love is a light you don't meter. That the fridge is for leftovers and drawings, not liens. That if people demand you prove your worth, sometimes the best revenge is to give them exactly what they asked for and then step entirely out of the store. I thought paying them back would feel like a drum solo. It felt like turning off a faint hum you stopped noticing years ago until it went away and you finally heard your own house sigh. The liberation wasn't the transfer, it was the boundaries it purchased in my own head. The money left my account at 9:04 a.m. on a Tuesday. The freedom showed up slowly, in coffee that tasted like coffee instead of a budget, in a nap on a couch without dreaming of invoices, in the way my shoulders don't rise when the garage door across the street opens. People have asked if I'll ever talk to them again. I don't know. I don't owe the future an answer. I owe the present my presence. If they wanted a relationship, they could have invested in one instead of an account receivable. You don't collect interest on conversations you didn't have. You don't repossess childhood. If someday my mother calls from a number that isn't blocked and says, "I'm sorry," I'll deal with that then, with the same measure I bring to a live panel, carefully, with distance, with respect for what can arc. I also think about the other kids in houses where groceries are a favor and showers are a negotiation. I want to tell you some practical things. Hide your money somewhere stupid and safe. Learn a skill you can trade that doesn't require permission to start. Keep paperwork. It's boring until it saves you. Read government websites. They're ugly but they don't lie. When someone uses the words "oh" and "love" in the same sentence, pause. Ask yourself if they're charging you for existing. If the answer is yes, you're not a debtor, you're a hostage. Planning your jailbreak isn't betrayal. It's engineering. On my desk there's a photo of our crew on a job last month, all of us lined up under a rooftop array that throws down perfect rectangles of shadow like a checkerboard. We're sweaty and filthy and the smiles are crooked because we were caught mid-laugh. When the photo was taken, Kay had just said, "Boss, if neat conduit is your love language, this roof just got a proposal." I said, "I'm married to the code." And everyone groaned. We went for tacos and I didn't count anyone's bites. The only ledger left in my house is a notepad on the fridge where I write dumb notes to myself. "Buy more cinnamon, call Mrs. H about the under-cabinet lights, you are not what they charged." Sometimes I write, "Debt repaid," on it when my brain starts its old chant, and then I draw an arrow to the trash and crumple the page. The cat bats it around like a trophy. We both win. When I close up the shop at night, I flip the main lights off in order, my little ritual of sending the day to bed. There's a click and then the softer buzz of the exit sign keeps watch. That's how I feel now, not flooded with light all the time, not performative brightness, just a steady lit path to the door. If someone from the past ever knocks, I'll open if I want to, not because Oh. If they show up with a ledger, I'll point to the memo on the bank receipt pinned under the magnet, and, if they refuse to read it, I'll save my breath. Some people worship scarcity. I don't go to that church. Here's the last thing. They taught me to meet transactional demands exactly and only once. It turned out to be a good sermon, just preached backward. You can draw a boundary with a calculator if you have to. You can close an account without closing your heart. You can pay what they claim love costs and still know love isn't a transaction. The relief isn't in the math. It's in the walking away, hands steady, eyes level, tools put away, the hum quiet, the work safe, the house finally your own.